when he says, let me make a helper for him. Any thoughts what the helper is going to help him do?
Well, meat. Doesn't they refer in King James as a help meet, not a helper? They're going to help meet his needs, help meet God's, whatever the needs are.
I don't know about the King James.
Okay.
I just know the I don't know the King James
Okay.
in terms of what English word the King James uses.
Okay.
But the word is helper
Oh,
in terms of helping. But well, just to save time, because I don't want to keep you here too long. I'm presenting it this way. I believe it's supposed to help say, yo, Adam, what are you looking at? You're supposed to be looking at God. In other words, the helper was to help Adam get back on course.
I was going to say to stay on track.
Oh yeah, because it is easy for any of us
Sure.
to start getting our minds, our wills, everything on the wrong thing. And we're not talking about male, female, that's not what I'm talking about. God just looks and says, this is not good, he needs help in order to stay the course. I'm going to make him someone that's going to help him. Genesis 3, Adam's Genesis 3 is actually in Genesis 2. Did you ever notice in Genesis 3, there's a long conversation between the serpent and the woman, and then we get like 5 words. She hands him the fruit, bam, he's gone. Doesn't that seem a little strange? I mean, to me it does. It took a lot to walk Eve down the path of deception. For him, disobedience was an arm's length away here. Because Adam was already screwed up. Adam was already, God gave him a helper. And he was already on the fence with the whole thing about what am I going to do? What I want to do or what God says to do. He hadn't disobeyed yet, but he was on the fence. He didn't need much. When the helper got deceived, who was supposed to help him, she hands him the fruit. The point I'm trying to make is this. We're just looking at wills kind of thing. The will of God, the will of man. Isaiah 14, we talked a little bit about Lucifer's fall last week from Ezekiel 28. When you read about it in Isaiah 14, 5 times he says, I will. I will ascend, I will do this, I will do that, I will do this, I will do it. It's all about I will. That's Lucifer's big thing. And that's really what he's bringing into the garden with him. Well, why don't you do this? What you will. Your will be done. Forget that thy will be done stuff. And we said last week, from the Ezekiel passage, it talks about iniquity being found in him. And in Isaiah 14, Carol's got a really good teaching on Isaiah 14 and the iniquities that are represented there. We said last week, we talked about iniquities that are propensities in us towards sin, but you can also think it's a propensity to separate, to express our will apart from God. My will. That's part of what is deep down inside of us. I mean, we wouldn't struggle so much, let's be honest about it. We wouldn't struggle so much if our wills were in total harmony with God's.
Right.
Now, being a musician, talking about harmony of the wills. Carol, would you go to the keyword I had asked you this morning?
Yeah.
Using the keyword I think is going to help us here with kind of coming to grips with what I'm calling harmony of the wills, God's will and our will, coming into harmony. Would you just play the middle C for me?
Whoa. We're up in octave.
Whatever.
All right. Got it.
Okay. And now play a minor second.
One note at a time? Or?
Yeah. Play them together. Anybody like that?
Not so much.
Not so much, no. Well, let's try a major second. Together? Well, we're heading in the right direction, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a little better.
let's try a perfect fifth. Together? That's pretty good. At least it doesn't sound like they're fighting.
Right.
There's a harmony there, at least they're not fighting. How about a perfect fourth? Tritone? Questionable. They used to call that Diablo's interval. They wouldn't allow it to be played in the church.
But it does
Now-
pose a question mark, doesn't it?
Okay, now let's do this. Let's try a major sixth.
Beautiful.
They're all nice sounds, aren't they? Would you give me an octave? Now, I'm not trying to do a music class here, but everything I had her do up until the last one, you could hear the two pitches. Some very tense, a lot of tension between the two. Some a little nicer, some very pure sounding. Last one, if she didn't play them separate, if she just played them together as an octave, you almost can't even hear the difference. In fact, you'd be hard pressed, could almost convince you that she's only pushing one key. Because the two tones that she's picking are the same exact tone, but apart. That is what we're striving for. We're in unison. Two different, there's still two different notes. We're not playing the same C twice. They're two different Cs, but there's such a harmony between them, a unison, you'd be hard pressed to really hear the difference. Whereas all the other intervals that she was playing, some we had a little bit harsher of a sound than others. And if I went over to the keyboard and wanted to elaborate a little bit more, I could take some of those early intervals that she played, the minor second, and play it in such a way with an accord that you'd say, wow, that's beautiful. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But the thing is this, with our will and God's will, where Jesus walked and what he demonstrated, he said it is possible. It is possible to walk in unison with God. Where your will doesn't stray a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right and it starts to get a little bit tense and it's possible. You can do that.
How?
That's what we're
Just
going
ask him.
to. Yeah, no, that's what we're going to be talking about.
All I can think of is just smashing of the will and the ego because, and fear.
Mhm.
I don't know how else. If I had a hammer, I don't know.
If I had a hammer. Thank you,
The
Carol.
other thing that goes along with it for me, I don't know if
I want to know how.
in the ones that were a little bit more, is dissonant the word? that-
Dissonant, very good, yeah.
You could hear the ripples outside each other, like I don't know if the.
I'll tell you, yeah, if we
Sound
could
waves or
listen, because she's,
something.
you know,
Sorry.
that's okay, she's talking over here.
But the more dissonant ones, you could hear the almost fighting of
Beats.
waves or something that ripple effect
Mhm.
from it, where when the more harmonious ones, there might be some of those ripples, but you know they were
Hardly
okay.
at
But
all, yeah.
the harsh ones, it was like a fight going on there. You know, like
Mhm.
I don't know. Does that really happen with sound?
Yes,
waves?
Yeah.
Is
the
that-
frequencies, the
The
frequencies. Yep, the frequencies, the waves themselves.
So the more
That's why it's-
harmonious, the more in unison. You know, everything is good.
Mhm. Right. And so the things where the further that we stray from God and God's will determines, again, I'm just using an instrument, a sound, you know, because it produces a sound. And I think we hear that so easily. more than, most anything else. You can start to hear those harmonies all over the place. And let's face it, let's be honest. We have been in situations where we know that right now the will that we are exercising is not just our own will, but something that is pretty far removed from good, pretty far removed from God's will that is good. And if we could hear it, we would start to hear really rough harmonies, really rough. And you also know, let me throw something, let's read a couple of scriptures from Matthew, and this will help a bit. I think it'll help. Matthew, the first chapter, there's a verse in here about Joseph, Jesus' earthly father. We're going to spend the rest of the night with Jesus. So.
I like that.
Yeah. Mary, would you go to Matthew, the first chapter? And Lorraine, would you go to Matthew, the 7th chapter? In Matthew 1:19, you'll recognize this as Joseph's way of dealing with Mary.
And Joseph, her husband, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her, planned to send her away secretly.
Okay, one more time.
And Joseph, her husband, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her, planned to send her away secretly.
Now the word wanting in the Greek is actually willing. He was not willing. He was a righteous man, which says something about his relationship with God, where he's walking in God. Because of where he's walking in God, he is not willing to see her undergo the humiliation of the law. Just send her away privately. He was not willing. His will, he knew what he willed. I am not willing. His will, what he did, in this case Mary, but this is for all of us, lest we be deceived like Eve. Our wills, when we make a decision and exercise our wills, just like God's will, our will has an impact on others. In Matthew 7, would you read verse 12?
Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets.
One more time.
Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets.
Now that sounds like Joe's son, doesn't it? I mean, put those two things together. Joseph, if he's in the position of Mary, how would you like to be treated? Oh, I'd love somebody to show some grace. Right?
Yeah.
So, he administers grace. His son, 30 years later, basically, you want grace? Show it. See, there's a lot of different things I want to say about the will tonight. I don't know that we'll get to all of them. We definitely won't. But one of the things is that our decisions, when we exercise our wills, so to speak, our choices, they impact others and they involve others. I know we'd like to think of it as separate things, but it's not. It's all interconnected and interrelated. It is not a separate thing. At his water baptism, we know the story, the skies open, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. The Old Testament character of will had to do with desire and delight. When God was talking about his Son, when he looked down and said, this is my Son, I'm so pleased, he's saying, this is my will coming forth. Watch what he does. He's come forth, he's good. He's my will, he's my desire, he's my delight. And Jesus is standing in the water basically saying, yeah, and you're my delight, and you're my desire. And there's this beautiful Father-Son thing happening. And the Holy Spirit says, I'm in. Woof. That's it. Where there's unison, I'm going to connect those two sounds. basically there's two prayers that I wanted to kind of look into tonight. They could be the first two prayers you think of when you think of two of Jesus's prayers. The Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, it has will right in it. Your kingdom come, your will be done. So Jesus, in the prayer itself, and they asked him how to pray, he encourages us to pray about God's will being done. The other prayer is from the Garden of Gethsemane. That's another prayer. It's not as long as the Lord's Prayer, and it's not one that we're necessarily encouraged to pray, but we are encouraged to pray in the sense that not my will be done, but your will be done. So, because that's what we're looking at, our wills. It doesn't take us long to realize that if Jesus is telling us to pray that God's will is done, there must be times it's not. The prayer doesn't make any sense. If God's will is always done, which is what this permissive perfect will kind of thing insinuates, then it doesn't make any sense. But let's not go to the theologians and tell them that. Let's just go with the fact that Jesus said, actually, God's will is not always done.